welcome back to the Libertopian Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Mitchell. I hope you're doing well. This is June 22nd, I think? Yeah, June 22nd. You know, I'm losing my mind day by day, and I can't even remember the date half the time. But there's tons of news to talk about today, so let's get right into it. The American Thinker, and then other websites as well, is reporting that the CIA is funneling arms into Syria for anti-Assad rebels. And you will never guess who they're funding it through. They're funding it through the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, I said that correctly. The Muslim Brotherhood is being funded by the CIA, namely through arms trafficking, obviously. But essentially, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen because this is a consistent playbook with the CIA. And look, most Americans don't care, right? The CIA is good, the government's good, and they're there to protect us, right? They don't know the history of the CIA and what the CIA has done over the years with Operation Ajax and the different types of plots that they've been involved with as far as coups to overthrow governments. And so most Americans just don't give a shit, frankly. So, looking at what's going to happen with this, 8 years from now, because of the CIA's actions in Syria, Syria will be ran by a Muslim theocracy, if you will, that will be pumping out terrorists like nobody's business. And those terrorists will go on to attack Western countries like England or France or Spain and Madrid and different bombings that have been there as well. So what will end up happening then is the American people will clamor for the U.S. government to do something. Please do something. These people are radicals and they're killing people, right? They won't look back and say, hey, why did the CIA fund the Muslim Brotherhood? Why did that happen? They won't look back and say that because they don't care. Anything to deflect blame, they will do. And it's frankly sad because it's immoral, right? It's an immoral tactic to whenever it's clearly there in history that the U.S. government and the CIA have been engaged in coups that ended up causing blowback on the United States of America, that the American people ignore it and deflect blame and say, you're blaming America. I'm not blaming America. Okay? America doesn't exist. The U.S. government doesn't exist, right? They're entities that you create in your mind so you can justify the immoral actions that they typically engage in. Now, there is such a thing as society as a whole, even though that's made up as well to some extent. But community exists because community is a group of individuals that come together for some sort of common good. But the moral laws that govern the community govern the individual. The individual is governed by the same moral laws and same moral consequences. And the government pretends like it isn't. And then when there are consequences like blowback, they ignore it. They say, look, it doesn't exist. I'm going to say CIA does say, they do say exist. But then they tell the American people that it doesn't exist. I mean, they have their own thing where they talk the truth and then they tell the American people to lie. Right, to help the conscience of the average American citizen who, simply is like, watching TV all day and they think the government's great, basically. The government is my friend. It gives me Social Security. It gives me Medicare. It's my buddy. And that's just nonsense. It's just silliness. It's ridiculous. So, that's basically what's going to happen. And I'm calling it right now, that 8 to 10 years from now, Syria will be a haven for terrorists, and it will be because of the actions of the CIA. Okay? And I'm going to, in 8 years, this podcast will be archived. I will pull it up for all of my neocon friends and say, look, I called it. There it is. Right? And it's on the internet. Right? The CIA, it's on American Thinker, which is a conservative site, and they're actually defending it. I mean, they're like, in the CIA's defense, you use the networks that are in place rather than trying to create your own conduits for arms. I mean, it's just insane. Insane. Just no moral foundation. Just throw it out with the bathwater. Just baby out with the bathwater. Whatever that saying is. I mean, it's crazy talk. It's not just crazy talk, it's immoral. And for conservatives to lecture the rest of us on morality, and then this is the kind of nonsense that they come up with to defend the actions of the government and the state, is just insane. And they ought to be ashamed of themselves, but I'm sure they will not be, so whatever. The Supreme Court was supposed to rule on health care today, and they didn't. They pushed it back to next week because they don't want to rule on it because it's a controversial issue, right? I mean, they don't want to make they don't want to give a definite answer to this. They really don't. And they could do a couple of things, but let me tell you what I think they're going to do. Okay? I think they're going to approve it. Okay? In so many ways. I think what's going to happen, possibly, and I could be wrong. I mean, they could stun me and just kick the whole thing out, or at least kill the individual mandate, right? So there's a couple things that could happen. And what I think is going to happen is they're going to say the law is constitutional, but we will allow the executive branch to determine if waivers are needed, which is exactly what they've been doing already. And so conservatives will say this is kind of a victory because we're about to have a conservative president, and he's going to throw it out. I mean, he'll have the power to give all these waivers out, right, to his buddies, right? Not to everyone, not to the small business down the street that's going to struggle to make payroll because of this horrendous law. No, it's not going to be for him. It's going to be for his banker buddies and his corporate donors. And so that's what's going to happen. And it's going to be completely fascistic in nature and horrendous in general. So just another example of completely immoral government, which government is the initiation of force, and therefore it's immoral on the foundation, so we shouldn't be surprised whenever this type of activity goes on. Moving on to some financial news, the housing market is at a 15-year low. And in many markets, renting is beating owning, which doesn't surprise me at all because, look, the market's not even at the bottom yet. It's not. There's no way it can be at the bottom, right? People are like, I think the housing market is at the bottom and it's about to recover. That's nonsense. That's complete nonsense. You cannot sustain, you can't sustain it, but there's no way that a market such as housing that has been inflated to the point and the bubble, has been up as high as it's been, can be at the bottom with near 0% interest rates, with the FHA loan program, with Fannie and Freddie. There's no way it's at the bottom, right, of where it really should be. Now, they could be lifting it up a little bit, but the reality is, if interest rates go up, and they will go up, it's going to happen. There's no way around it. Interest rates will have to go up, not necessarily in the near future, but they're going to have to rise eventually. You can't keep 0% interest rates forever. At some point in time, either the peg that we have to the Chinese is going to collapse, or the Chinese workers are going to be so impoverished from their inflationary policies of the Chinese government that they will no longer be productive workers, and companies are no longer it's not going to be in China's interest to maintain that peg anyway. So that's a couple things that could happen with that. But again, I don't think the housing market has hit its low. It's still got some room to fall. On another side of the financial coin, Moody's cut the ratings of 15 banks. Morgan Stanley especially got cut down 2 notches, according to Reuters. And look, this isn't surprising. Going back to the interest rate situation, look, if interest rates go up, most of these banks are insolvent. Right? They're insolvent because of the moral hazard that's been created by the Federal Reserve for so long. And look, they're trying to prop up a broken banking system. The capital structure is shit, and there's only one way to fix it. The problem is, to fix it and to rebuild the capital structure, you're going to have to raise interest rates. And when you do, not only will those banks collapse, but there will be nobody to continue to finance the federal government. So the federal government will have to default. But I think that's a good thing. I think the federal government should slowly restructure its debt, maybe quickly restructure its debt. It's got to do something. And this might be a way of forcing them to do that. obviously if interest rates are forced up and some of these banks are insolvent. But the thing is, they're going to keep interest rates as low as they possibly can for as long as they possibly can. Because, like I said, once they go up, the instabilities and the unsustainability of the market is going to reveal itself. And people are going to realize that we've been living in this fantasy land, not necessarily since 2008, but for about 30, 40 years. At least since Nixon took us off the gold standard, we've been living in somewhat of a fantasy land. We got hit with some reality by Paul Volcker, but I would say most of the fantasy was created by Alan Greenspan, and it's still continuing to a large degree. But at some point in time, it's going to have to fix itself, right? I mean, markets don't, markets can't stay on one side of the equilibrium for too long. It's always going to flip back to the other side and clear out the imbalances. So at some point in time, that's what's going to happen. But hopefully, the American people are in a position to wake up. And that's my hope. And I could be wrong. They might not wake up. They might not wake up to their slave camps, until there's concentration camps with malnourished skeletons walking around everywhere. That might be when the American people decide that they want to wake up and do something. Until then, they're fine with just being zombies and watching Dancing with the Stars. LeBron James got his NBA ring or whatever last night. I don't even follow it, really. It's just garbage. But, that's what everyone's talking about, right? It's all about the bread and circuses. And we're just like Rome. We're just like Rome. We're going to get raped. It is sad. But, like I said, hopefully, I'm praying. I'm doing a lot of things, and I'm hoping that the American people will wake up. And look, we got to keep trying. We got to keep educating people, and that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast and trying to put out information out there. Right now, we've got about 52 subscribers, 4,000 hits on the podcast channel. It's a new podcast. It's only been out a few months, but we'll keep it going. And if you are a subscriber on the podcast through iTunes, you can also go to YouTube and look up Libertopian Podcast on YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then also, if you'd like to leave me a comment on there, you're more than welcome to. If you want to leave me a question to address on the podcast, I would love to. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, hey, go to iTunes and download the podcast from there. And there's also a RSS feed in the description of the YouTube channel or the YouTube video, whichever one you're looking at. There should be an RSS feed link there in that description. Just go there and you can download the podcast as an MP3, or obviously if you're an Apple user, what I mean by Apple user is you have an iPod or an iPhone, go to iTunes and download the podcast directly from the iTunes store. It's on there as well. But other than that, that's all I have for you guys on this week's edition of the Libertopian Podcast. I thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.